Hey, welcome everyone to our road to the CSA Summit at RSA. I'm pretty excited to not just get to RSA and be at the CSA Summit, but leading up to it, hanging out with not a couple of people who I have a lot of respect for. I think are incredible experts in our industry. We're here to talk about how to build an NHI lifecycle that really scales, talking about from legacy systems onto what we're doing with surface accounts onto AI agents. And so, a really important topic. If you don't know me, I'm John Yeoh. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at CSA. I get to do all the cool stuff that we have in R&D. I do a lot of our federal engagements, so I work with our government, other governments on how we're securing agentic AI, how we're securing cloud. I also work with a lot of the innovation, the innovators, the latest solutions, and how enterprises are adopting them. So that's why I have fantastic guests today. I'm just going to have them introduce themselves, and I want to start with you, Chris. Chris Gruel, please say hi and tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, so my name is Chris Gruel. I'm the Distinguished Solutions Engineer at Oasis Security, an enterprise technology veteran with over 20 years of experience, and the vast majority of that was at the largest home improvement retailer in the United States, where I contributed to their digital transformation and was integral in the company's move towards containerization. Now I help companies manage the growing non-human identity problem, and my focus is on making sure that the right way is the easy way. So it kind of dives into my platform engineering background. And I've lived this challenge from the inside as a practitioner, and now I see it across dozens of enterprises.
Man, Chris, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Can't wait to get into this with you. But first, let's also talk about Karim. Karim Syed, please say hi and tell everybody about you as well.
So I am Karim Syed. I lead the identity and access management platforms for one of the S&P 500 fintech company. I have around 16 years of experience in cybersecurity and with majority of my experience in identity and access management. So I lead teams that are working on modernizing their IAM stack, managing them, implementing them, and I have good amount of experience in mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. We have been working a lot on that. And more recently, I have started my efforts around discovering, managing, and governing, protecting non-human identities. And yeah, today I'm very excited to join you and Chris to discuss on moving beyond managing passwords for non-human entities to building and scaling an end-to-end lifecycle governance platform for the future of AI-driven enterprises. I'm really excited to join you guys. Yeah, thank you.
Kareem, yeah, super excited to have you. I'll set up kind of why, what we're going to talk about today too. But towards the end of last year, 2025, CSA and Oasis, we did a survey just on what the state of NHI is. AI agents were huge coming up at the time. And we got through about 400 different professionals, and we have some interesting stats that I wanted to talk about too. But everything's moving so fast, which is why we wanted to talk about it now. And we couldn't even wait till RSA. There's a lot of us that'll be either at RSA, speaking at RSA, certainly talking about this topic itself. Only 8% have high confidence in their legacy systems and how that really supports managing their NHI and AI risk. Less than a quarter, and it's really, if we look at it, like 78% was the actual number. They lack formal, really any type of documentation when it comes to policy creation for removing and managing AI. And then 29% spend more than, I mean, this is crazy to me, spend more than 24 hours a month on manual NHI management. And so, Chris, maybe we can start with you here, man. What do you think of these statistics? I don't know, pick one, pick two, pick three. How do you feel about these?
Honestly, like I look at 8% high confidence, and like, how confident are they actually in high confidence? Because that just seems way too much to me.
Yeah, I have to agree with Chris there. The 8% really feels like an optimistic minority people who are IM professionals here. So, the backstory, we have built a lot of controls around human identities, like with, they have proper governance, proper MFA, human lifecycle management, we have access certifications, but we have left our back door wide open with so many unmanaged service accounts. When you realize that why that NHI, the way the confidence is around 8%, you realize that how the confidence is very low across IAM professionals about non-human identities and the AI explosion of these AI agents. You can clearly see the low confidence across IAM professionals around there. And I agree with majority of the people that the 78%, whatever number that you're showing, the gap is real. Unlike a traditional human identity, there is no centralized platform for non-human identities, right? So now with agents joining the same non-human identities league, so this is just getting dangerous in my experience, because NHIs are often invisible. They are sitting in somewhere in your legacy scripts, in your configuration, somewhere in your infrastructure. These identities are created at a velocity that these traditional IAM tools, I don't think they have evolved yet to manage that type of those identities and the jobs that they perform, right? With the permissions and things like that. And the third number, like if you have a security team spending like a day in a month just managing an Excel sheet with hundreds of accounts, whether to make sure that these are overly privileged, are these passwords rotated, I think they're not doing a great job. I think we have to automate these janitorial work so that all these professionals can focus on like the high value risk reduction. Yeah, that was my take on it.
It's so funny too because I do remember when we, this statistic stood out because to me, still, like, hey, we're talking about 1 out of 12, 1 out of 13, feel like they can really handle that, which is still not, from an enterprise perspective, you can't be, you can't feel good about that low percentage, feeling like they have a good approach when it comes to agents and NHIs. But like you said, that number is still generous. So yeah, Chris, when you said that, it made me think about, these are perceptions. What tools are they using? We almost want to meet some of the people that really feel good about, their approach to managing NHIs and yeah, have them share maybe with some of their secrets. I feel like this is one that we can probably sit in for a while here too. What are the following challenges that you encounter when it comes to managing NHIs? And one of the big ones to me here too was no clear ownership of accountability when it comes to managing NHIs. And I feel like if there's no accountability, if there's no visibility, if we don't know who owns the process, I think that's a big problem. And we have over 51%, over half this group, feels this way about it.
Yeah, ownership, especially for me, like it really hits home. When I was at the Home Depot, um, I tried to actually build a platform, an auto application tracking platform that would like look and research everything and pull that information up and figure out who's doing it and have it be automatic based on people looking for information and then going look at. The problem was back in 2016, 2017, the technology wasn't there. It wasn't ready yet. We spent like 7 months trying to build it with a 7-person team, and we eventually abandoned it. It just wasn't ready. That's the thing, right? Ownership is everything. You have to be able to determine that ownership. And I'm glad, AI helps with that a lot nowadays. So I think that's the key. You can't remediate if you don't know who owns it. Simple as that.
Graham, how about in your organization too? I think even early we kind of talked about just the difference between managing human identities and non-human identities, and this is an issue if there's a lack of accountability and lack of ownership.
I think first we need to understand the control gaps that we have between non-human identities and the human identities, right? When you take a look at a human identity, we actually have a very mature blueprint, right? So we have a joiner, mover, lever processes in place, that are triggered by HR events. For example, if an employee joins my team, so he will have his birthright access, and when he leaves the team, all his access will be killed automatically. All his accounts across multiple platforms will be deprovisioned. You know, so we have a proper governance humans, and from the control standpoint, we have single sign-on, we have MFA, and we check thousands of these signals whether they are accessing from a trusted device. We score them. If the confidence score is less than something, we block them accessing our critical assets, right? So, and we also have processes in place where regular periodic certification happens, where a manager can decide that the employee can still does he need this permission, right? If he doesn't need it, if he moved on to a different task, he can kill that permission. He can take out those permissions. So all of this happens in a centralized one or two platforms, right? You have Workday, you have your IGA tool that manages the whole life cycle and the permissions and stuff. But coming back to non-human identities, you know, if I just take an example, let's say you imagine you are a product developer, you want to build a dashboard in 2 weeks, and then you want to show it to your executive team. So the first thing that you do is you reach out to your developers or your DevOps engineer, your database team, asking them to create a service account, right? So when you reach out, so it's a human tendency, right? So when you reach out to them asking for a read-only admin, so they don't have time to do the least privilege model, or they are not security professionals. So they just create a API token or service account with full admin privileges, and they share them over Slack or some teams. So, so the 2 weeks sprint, I think after 2 weeks, the product manager is happy, the team is happy, they got their job done, everybody moved on, right? So, but the identity that you created, it's still there, it's gonna be there. If you go back, the 2 week sprint story, if you go back after 2 years, it is still running, it is just naked sitting around in your Slack and Teams chat. So that's the kind of risk that we are talking about NHS, right? So if you take the risk, so there's no record, there's no HR record, there's no rotation, there's no expiration to that non-human identity. So I feel like majority what I'm seeing in our enterprise or some other wherever I work, when I was talking to a lot of people, so majority of these NHIs were created for short term, right? So for some purpose. So these are very, very important because these NHIs run our systems. Even we build them, but these NHIs are the major workforce that runs your applications. They connect to various systems. They play a very critical role, but majority of these NHIs are meant for a sprint also, but they end up in like having for 2 3 years until someone comes and take a look at them and review them and until some audit happens. Until then, they're just still sitting naked there. That will drastically increase the attack surface, right? So this tells about our governance challenge, so you cannot secure what you cannot see. So unfortunately, in these kind of situations with NHIs, security teams or IAM teams are the last people to know about the creation of this identity.
That's just today's, I guess, DevOps environment too, right? So you're telling us that people are just they're spinning up the service accounts they have to just to integrate with the other vendors, but then that really leads to just no ownership. Yeah, I like that you talk about just the ephemeral nature of a lot of these NHIs too, and we're seeing it with agents. I know a lot of a lot of the native services are starting to at least try to build processes for some of those ephemeral agents and NHIs out there. But man, they're such a critical part of how we operate and how even agents interact with systems and other agents. And so, I guess top governance challenge is you can't govern what you can't see and what you can't attribute. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Chris, I kind of you touched a little bit about that with your Home Depot story too, there, right? Just the whole attribution thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because attribution is that hard part, right? Like non-human identities, they're going to live outside that joiner, mover, lever, life cycle. We need this non-human identity that's running this application indefinitely until we no longer need it. And it could be under team A and then move to team B and then move to support and then move to whoever, right? And quite often nobody comes in and cleans up those permissions after the fact even when they're, because they could be in the same department. They're just no longer in charge of that identity anymore. So yeah, it all comes down to figuring out that ownership, figuring out, doing the attestations and figuring out who's actually owning these non-human identities.
I think to build on that Chris point, right? So there's a massive cultural gap. So it's called bypass culture. So I'm not saying developers or DevOps teams are trying to be insecure here.
Yeah.
So they're just trying to be agile. So they work on very tight timelines. You know, if an official process takes like 3 to 4 days, then they will find a way to create a service account and an API token in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, right? In the human identity world, we have built enough security at the entry gate itself, right? So starting from the hiring process, from the joining process, so we have a very tight, mature security process in place. But with NHIs, we end up in discovering an identity we are the last to know that the identity has been created, you know. And this culture has to be, I think, changed. I think we have to train our teams across the enterprise to have a good security culture embedded within their team itself. You know, and things have been also changing with audit, right? So when the audit happens, this is where when an auditor asks like, who owns this service account? What is its purpose? There's no evidence, right? So there's no process that has been followed. There's no joiner process, just like human identities for this NHI. There's no audit trail of approval. So we end up in digging through logs to find out like who created this, why did they create it, right? And what permissions it has, who has been using this so far. It's a pretty bad state. This opens up a regulatory risk for the whole enterprise.
I agree. I also think like that's driving other, bottom line stuff. Like for instance, I think it's going to be tied directly to, as more and more breaches happen, it's going to be tied to cybersecurity insurance, right? Like, hey, you're going to say, we don't have great answers for these audit findings. We still don't have great answers for the audit findings. And then your cybersecurity insurance company is going to be like, you really don't have much of an NHI practice there. Your new rate is this.
Yeah, that's interesting to even think about too, Chris. Right? I mean, our adoption of AI and this agentic AI is about creating automations, and how does that impact now our like that should be good, you think, from a cyber insurance perspective, but perhaps not if you can't demonstrate that. And yeah, I liked how we talked a little bit about, Kareem talked about auditability and auditing logs of these NHIs and agents, and the sheer ephemeral nature. I remember when even we talked about serverless environments, these ephemeral cloud instances that were spinning up, that was the answer. Well, like, hey, at least the answer is always in the logs. It's always in the audits of those logs. But when we talk about at scale too, uh, as we move into just the tens and thousands of NHIs, the study that we did, showed that I think it was people were seeing about a 10 to 20 ratio of NHIs to human. And I think that is going to change drastically. I mean, it's changing drastically already. And so, can we really scale audit when we get into NHIs? I'm really curious about that part too. This leads kind of right into these other interesting stats that we saw. So we have this, over half have a lack of accountability and ownership when it comes to NHIs, and now it leads to this downstream effect. 24%, like a quarter, take more than 24 hours to rotate or revoke credentials. 30% take over 24 hours to triage high severity risks. Another almost 30% take over 24 hours on just manual NHI management. And to me, these numbers are astounding. It talks about what we just mentioned. And Kareem, maybe I think this hits home with you when you were talking about audit and the manual process of that. Is that right?
I agree with these numbers. These are totally too bad, you know. So what? So from the maturity standpoint, like So we have to build a proper, mature life cycle management for NHIs. You know, it isn't about gathering all the NHIs and their passwords and putting them in some LogPass or in some one password manager, right? It's about having a system of record, just like humans. We have a system of record for these non-human identities. You know, we have to tie ownership to it. We have to monitor their permissions all the time. So we have to learn all the lessons that we applied on the human identities and and apply them to non-humans, right? So, in my view, since this is a decentralized space, unlike humans, you know, the first and the first stage that we have to do is visibility, right? Build that visibility, do the discovery. And it's just not a one-time scan that you do across all your applications, your databases. They have various like SaaS platforms, PaaS platforms, right? So it's not one-time scan. You have to have that continuous monitoring built in. You know, you have to discover all these NHIs that are created. Some of them, I'm pretty sure what we have seen so far is they're decades old, right? So they're just sitting around and doing nothing. So it's do not have it's not about manual spreadsheets and managing them monthly or quarterly basis. We need to really build this visibility of continuous monitoring, and and along with that visibility, you need to build context around them, right? So you need to know, you should be able to map them with your CMDB, right? So who is the actual owner of this non-human identity? Who- You need to figure out who are the primary owners, if you have like who are the secondary owners. You should have a point of contact, like what application is this human identity for? You should be able to tag your CMDB and what permissions it has. Who are the consumers of this human identity? Like what is it connecting to? So where is the request coming from? So we have all these controls in place for humans, and we need to extend them to non-humans, right? And once you have that, so you need to build the governance around it, right? So just like how we have the access certifications to make sure humans doesn't have overly privileged, they should just have the right privilege to do their job. We need to do the same thing for non-human identities. We need to make sure we certify them. We send the quarterly or 6 month notification to owner saying that, do you still need it? Do you want to decommission it, right? And just like how we have built controls around human identities, we track each and every activity from them, like whether they log in from, we validate their behavioral, right? So if the behavior changes, so we block them or we step up their authentication. You know, we need to do the similar thing. We need to continuously monitor the behavior of that NHI, and then we should take appropriate action. We should alert our SOC teams based on the criticality and stuff. So to answer your question, right? So where are the most of the organizations in this race, right? So pretty much I have been spending a lot of time on NHIs, and I feel like there's good traction on these NHIs from last couple of years, and but most organizations are still in their early phases. So they have been able to discover through various ways, and they are in early discovery phases, and they are trying their hard to build the governance around it. And the reason for that, and this is not a simple one team project, right? So it has to be coordinated with all the technical managers, architects across the enterprise. You should be able to convince them, tell them the risk that these NHS will bring. You should be able to explain them and partner with them in building this governance platform. You should be able to let them know the risks of not managing them properly.
And then you brought it back to kind of that ownership and accountability at the end there too on
Mhm.
on who owns that process. But yeah, I mean, to me, after hearing it, sounds like we're really still, one stuck in the discovery phase. And you mentioned this earlier too. There is just there are a desperate amount of NHIs. I think the term NHI is just it's a blanket term for anything that's non-human now, and it's a lot, right? It's a lot of different things.
Yes.
It's everything from service accounts to AI agents to the the tool calling itself, and so yeah, huge broad spectrum of NHIs to track. Uh,
Absolutely.
Governance is certainly an issue, as you touched on, and monitoring is going to be important for that too.
And speaking of monitoring, like I think, right, that continuous visibility that Kareem was talking about, right? You have to have that continuous visibility because that's the only way you're going to be able to figure out like one of the most common things, like stale identities, right? Is that's a running path, right? You like how long has this been stale, right? When I was at Home Depot, there's the end of the year. Nobody touches anything at the end of the year because we're going to have to do finances and we're going to have to do all this other stuff. And you've got annual batch jobs that only run in that time frame. So you need to have that continuous running check, that continuous monitoring of these identities to truly determine, is this a stale identity or is this something that runs once a year or something along those lines? Because look at something like, and I see this all the time in the field, something like Migration Wiz. So some of you guys might be familiar with Migration Wiz, right? It's to help you migrate, from on-prem up to Azure Entra and move
Yeah.
move a whole bunch of stuff. And it's given a large amount of access, right? And you only need it for that migration. And then after that, it just stays there forever and it has a lot of access. So those are the kinds of things that continuous monitoring is going to help you check.
Kareem, I think you even touched on that earlier. We talked about, hey, spinning up NHIs and then forgetting about them, or there's no ownership, and so
Mm-hmm.
they are stale, they are orphaned, they are sitting there with permissions, and they just even exist when they don't even need to anymore, right? Kareem, stale or orphan identities, are they harder to manage the longer they actually are abandoned or ignored?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I agree with you. So, and if you don't have a context around these identities, you know, so these identities are managing and running your application, as I said before, right? So they run the show for you, right? So they are very, very critical, right? So for your applications, and if you are in a highly regulated environment, right? So breaking things or breaking the flow, breaking application is it's a massive compliance and it's a financial event, right? So if an identity sits longer, and it's very harder to remove, right? So everybody's afraid to touch it because something is going to happen. It's very hard to convince the teams without the context, without knowing anything about the identity. It's been sitting for a while, so it's very hard to convince people even to touch it. So I totally agree with you. So I can relate to that a lot of times in my work too. Yeah.
Yeah, that fear of breaking things in production, that's what helps keep stale identities much longer than they should be. Absolutely.
It even reminds me a little bit back in the day when, well, not even back in the day, but we're still dealing with just keys that are just sitting there forever, like
Yeah.
keys in our lockers, just keys sitting around that uh, we haven't used them anymore. We don't use them anymore, but they still exist, and they can still give certain attackers access to a lot of different things if we don't dispose of them properly. So key rotation, NHI, lifecycle rotation, and governance. There's so many parallels I see to how we are moving into this agentic realm, and it's not just creating new issues, but it's exacerbating issues that we've had. I've shown up another fun statistic here. I thought the automation thing's interesting. We covered that in the survey report too a lot. We talk about just there's less than half are semi-automated. A quarter are still very very manual, and I thought this was interesting to look at too. So we have less than a quarter here uh, have formally adopted the policies for creating or removing AI. We have less than 1 out of 5, and I think it's actually like 16 or 17% here, uh, do say that they have full automation. I think that number's still high. I'm curious what you all think about that. 39% cite that governance is a top concern. And Kareem, after hearing what you were talking about too, if only 39% our curse nerd about governance. I think we almost need to double that one too.
I see it like, I'm using AI tools all the time, and most of my colleagues are as well. You get more done with less, and that's right. That's the thing that we should be doing. But every single tool that we connect up, behind the scenes, we're creating a non-human identity, right? And so shadow AI is like, it's the new shadow IT, which I'm quite familiar with because I started on the business side at Home Depot, right? And this shadow IT, right, this shadow AI stuff creates operational credentials attached to production systems, permissions that nobody reviewed because they're delegating my own permissions, right? And agentic credential chains, right, where you have one agent call another, and that agent has different access and different permissions. Yeah, the delegate permissions, creating child credentials, the blast radius is just not linear. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I think, yeah, my take on AI, right? I love this AI revolution. I have been using AI every day in every task. It's
Yeah.
very hard for me to go back not using AI, right? So, and I see a lot of people are using AI in their every day-to-day activity, right? So there are various kinds of AI pretty much in every whatever role you are in, you're a product manager, developer, QA. So they have embedded AI into their in their work life, right? So it's very hard to go back now. And coming back to when I hear from the strategy standpoint, when I talk to a lot of product managers or application teams, everybody is in the same race, right? So they're trying to have AI into their product roadmap. You know, they're trying to convert their applications into AI-driven apps, right? So, and if you are a manager of, if you manage APIs, if you build APIs, now everybody is trying to build a wrap on top of it through MCP protocol. So things have been moving from simple Q&A based agents to agents which take action, right? So, which agents take actions on the products, right? On the tools that you use every day. So with the evolution of these new protocols like the A2A protocol, the MCP protocol, right? So there's a model that is coming into play now. Right? It's not a simple automation where you already predefine the script. It does exactly the same thing, right? So it doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. It fails or it runs as you design, right? But NHIs with AI agents, right? So they have a model, right? So that takes the decision. So based on the prompt that the user input, so it decides what needs to be done, right? So across all these products. So permissioning these AI agents is the most critical thing, right? So we shouldn't overly privilege it, and we should always have human in the loop, and we should always have the proper logging in place, right? So I feel like the governance is going to shift around AI agents, right? So it's just not about who owns this NHI, who owns this identity. It's all about who owns this agent, right? That internally uses this NHI. So yeah, it's a much a harder place, but yeah, having these AI agents as part of NHI's really complicated. I mean, it's a complex solution to work on.
I'm actually glad we're talking about this. I was excited about today's talk just because it's the awareness piece. I mean, you mentioned it. We're all using AI to many heavy degrees. In fact, too. I think I don't know how many of y'all are playing with OpenClaw. Maybe that scares you that I am, but I am pretty heavy into it. And so, yeah, why aren't we addressing? We saw the numbers when it came to how many people are still using manual processes with NHIs. I don't know if we're just not thinking about the issue, or if there's just a lack of tools, or Kareem, has that been the challenge with your teams? Is that we don't have the right tools to really move quicker on automating this NHI process?
Yeah, you're right. So I we don't know, right? So these are, as I mentioned, these are decentralized. Anybody can spin up an NHI and AI agents. So it's very hard to know, like to have a centralized place to know about all these NHIs, what they possess, what the permissions to govern them. it's a really big challenge as of now that we are facing. We have been working towards it. We have been trying to build connectors and try to get all the NHI and AA information inventory in one place to build context around it and to be able to govern them, right? So we are all working towards having a governance layer built around NHIs similar to how we have around humans, and that includes AI agents as well.
Yeah, no, I love hearing Kareem's insight because I know you're ahead of a lot of the people that I've talked to. I think Chris and I, we like to look at these statistics too, and we like to actually find out who, where everybody fits on which side. Are you on that, 18% that's really, struggling to adopt policies for NHI creation, or are you, ahead of the game? And we always thought, at least chatting with you, Kareem, that your team's, pretty ahead. Another fun stat we saw, you know, this is just kind of pulling from the statistic, but we saw, 12% of organizations were really highly confident in their ability to not just, I think we talked about managing NHIs, but even preventing attacks, via NHIs. And we've seen a number of those over the years, like literally over the years. That gap's widening. Don't we see that gap widening now, especially after what we've talked about? There's just a lack of understanding how to address NHIs, even though we're comfortable trying to implement automation and use AI in different places. This is one area that's kind of being ignored, and we're seeing the gap widen a little bit too. So, are there two or three things that we should really be thinking about right now when it comes to how we can manage and prevent, well, not just attacks on NHI, but just kind of govern and capture the state of NHI within our own organizations a bit better?
So I think one thing like that pretty much anyone can do just this week, right? Find 3 NHIs in your environment with no documented owner, right? Just 3, and try and figure out who owns it, everything you can find out about it, right? And that makes it concrete, right? You can see how difficult this is. I know large multi-billion-dollar organizations that are still running ownership stuff on Excel spreadsheets, right? This is just common, right? And then for AI especially, right? You treat every agent identity as a privileged identity from the moment of creation, right? Because ownership is assigned at birth, it's not retrofitted, right? But the risk side is just not optional. Like there isn't a next quarter problem, right? You have to deal with this stuff right now. And that's what I think everybody needs to focus on, at least in the short term, right? Towards the long term, all of it.
I love that. No, man, what a simple thing. Let's find three, and you're saying just find three. But what that's going to do is, not only are we going to be able to address the risk profile of those credentials, but we can also just create awareness on, like, hey, here's just what these three are doing. How many more do we have out there that are undiscovered? And it's back to, like, all right, discover first. Still seems to be a
Right.
big issue with NHI. So let's start with that and see how we can start tackling the rest of those. Very cool. Kareem, I don't know if you want to build on top of that.
Yeah, so I agree with Chris with all the points he was mentioning. So my recommendation or the path forward for organizations who wants to make sure their NHI governance and management is like you start with the creation process, right? So you need to build the ownership into the process itself, right? So if anybody, if a team wants to spin up a service account or an AI agent, they shouldn't be allowed until they they have a human owner associated with it, right? So until they have a CMDB ID or a cost center associated with it, you know, it shouldn't be it has to be a hard policy. So you just need to simply select no owner, no no identity, right? So the other recommendation or the observation that I have was like, so I often see a lot of these IAM teams, they celebrate early once they have the final list of all the service accounts that they have discovered, right? So, so the discovery or the inventory that we gathered from our infrastructure, from our applications, it's just a foundation. So you got to do a lot of work on top of it, right? So It's not a finish line. We just need to move from gathering all the inventory, all the NHIs to having an automated governance built on top of them. What I have been seeing, like I see the NHI questions are coming up in all the audit findings, you know, so all the inquiries, the regulatory inquiries, and even we have been having these NHI discussions at the board level, right? So they understand the risk. So that's the kind of exposure or the knowledge that is going around NHIs. We are working on it. We are working towards it. It has a very short shelf life right now, and bringing all these non-human identities in one place and having an automated governance, right? This will definitely improve your security posture and it will reduce your attack surface. These are some of the recommendations and that anybody is trying to have in an NHI program, that they have built into it. And we have been trying the same thing in our organization. So we have been moving aggressively towards building that automatic governance across the NHIs.
I like that. Chris, you really talked about like the brownfield thing, right? Let's go back and kind of look at some of the NHIs that we need to discover and understand better. And Kareem, you're like, hey, also in the future, we need to establish more of a foundation of governance and ownership of NHIs. And so, hey, let's start both and just build a stronger NHI security program. So, yeah.
100%. Start the work now. Start with the highest risk objects first, long lived credentials, over permissioned service accounts, production access with no owner on record, right? And trigger those, like figure out what you can, how difficult it is to find the owners, things like that. And come to RSA for the full playbook on real disaster stories, the patterns, and the tactical and strategic plan.
Absolutely. CSA Summit's going to kick off the first Monday of RSA like we have for the last 17 years, I want to say. And, we're all going to be there, right? So come say hi, swing by the booth, swing by our sessions. It'd be really good to see everybody and continue these discussions. So take good notes. Bring them to Kareem, bring them to Chris, and bring them to me, and I'll take them to Kareem and take them to Chris. Gosh, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. I almost want to leave on this good note. I like the whole, hey, discover, brownfield, greenfield. We really aren't addressing just new issues here. We're exacerbating the existing issues that we've had with identity for a long time. So identity sprawl is not new. It's just something that we need to get a handle of, especially as we see this broad, different types of NHIs that we're coming across. Not to mention the integration, the important part of NHIs when it comes to agent adoption, agent implementation, agentic communication, and so it plays such a critical role of how every single layer of your agentic AI system is going to operate. Super important stuff. All right, I think that's everything. I think we did it. Kareem, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can see the little QR code that you can actually click on to download the survey report as well, and let us know what you think, and we'll follow up and do a part 2. Sound pretty good to you, Chris?
Absolutely. Happy
All
to do
right.
it.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Fantastic.
See you at RSA.